I'd like to take a moment to share with you what I thought was a solid conversation with a new client couple. It's my hope that what I shared with them is a help to you. The way it was to them. She is 31, he's 35. They have no children, though she is 4 months pregnant. They came to me. She brought them to me because she said, Doc, I've been following your work now for about 6 months, and I have made my husband watch your last couple of lives. I said, You made them? She said, Yes, sir, I did. I said, Sir, is that true? He said, Yes, sir. I hadn't heard of you. And she asked if I would sit in. And so I've been watching them, and she's pretty much made that a thing that we do every Thursday. I said, Okay. I said, Continue. And she said, Well, we've been married for 3 years now, and I am really concerned about our marriage. I said, Well, what's going on? She said, I'm fully convinced that our energies are not in the appropriate place, that in fact, he acts more like a woman than he does a man, and I act more like a man than I do a woman. I said, Okay, what brings you to that conclusion? She said, Well, I've been following your work, and I have read the 5 areas of healing multiple times. And I'm convinced that even if you heal yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially, none of that matters if we don't show up as the most healed and complete version of ourselves. I said, Ma'am, I could not have said that better. That in fact, your masculinity and femininity is only as strong as your healing. And many people don't realize that it is quite possible for you to be quote unquote masculine but still not be healed, and for you to be quote unquote feminine and still not be healed. That you in fact can have those traits but not have mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, or financial control and stability. She said, Doc, that's exactly what I've been saying to him. And I feel this way just because of how things are handled when there is conflict. I said, explain that to me. She said, conflict and offense is a big problem in our marriage. We can have an argument. And in the beginning, when we were first married, he wanted to try to solve problems. He did make an effort to solve problems, but over time, he has become more feminine in that when we have a hard, difficult situation, his communication sucks so poorly that he will literally go weeks and not say a word to me. I said, You guys are in the same house and don't talk for weeks? She said, Yes, sir. I said, as in a week or two? She said, Sir, the longest we've been was a month and a half. I said, You guys didn't say a word to each other? She said, Not a single word. I said, You didn't say anything about lunch, dinner? She said, Not a single word. I said, Did you sleep in the same bed? She said, We did. I said, Well, you're obviously engaged in sex at some point. She said, That may have happened once or twice over that month and a half period of time. She said, But we don't talk. And she said, I really didn't even want to do that, but I did that because I felt like I was supposed to do it as a wife. And he didn't really ask for it. He just kind of went for it. So I went with it, but we still didn't talk before. We didn't talk during, and we didn't talk after. And I was shocked. I sat there and I listened, and I was really shocked. I said, Sir, is this true? He said, Yes, sir, it is. He said, We haven't talked. When she really pisses me off, I feel like the best thing for me to do is just to shut down. I said, So you're an avoidant? He said, I'm not quite sure what that means. I said, Have you done any healing work on yourself? You've been to counseling therapy? He said, No, sir. I said, Well, I would highly recommend that you look into being an avoidant, because clearly, if your response to offense is to run, that's not an appropriate response to offense. And while she might be chasing you by having you in therapy, eventually she's going to get tired of doing that. She said, Doc, I just told him last night. When I reminded him that we had this call, and he made it like he really wasn't sure he wanted to be on the call. I said to him, Then after this call, you can decide whether or not you want to do this anymore, whether you want to do the therapy or even the marriage, because I'm not going to keep chasing you, because I feel like I've been doing that. And it's exhausting, not to mention that I'm 4 months pregnant and I'm carrying something inside of me, a child inside of me, and I'm having to chase you down and make you do your part. And she said, I'm not doing that anymore. I said, Sir, is that true? He said, Yes, sir, it is. So she continued on and said, When we have problems, he'll go, it's nothing for him to go days without us talking, because he's gone a month and a half without us talking. He gets quiet. He withdraws. I have asked him what's wrong. He won't, he'll say nothing, but he'll walk around the house quiet, won't say a word. And it's just, she said, Doc, it's like being in prison. I saw your video about being married and feeling like you're in prison. And when I saw that, I knew that I had to book some time for us to talk. I said, okay. I said, what, guys, is the goal of this session? She said, well, Doc, honestly, I want to see if where I'm the problem in this, because maybe I'm the problem. But I will tell you, Doc, I don't like being a man. I feel like I'm the man in this marriage, and I don't want to be the man. I really want to be the woman that I've been called to be. I want to be a woman that is a strong communicator, but also a woman that can trust in the direction and the guidance and the love of her husband. And I don't trust him. I don't trust him because he doesn't talk to me when he gets offended. I don't trust him because when he gets mad, he withdraws. I don't trust him because he gets more quiet than I do when we have to solve problems. When issues are tough, he gets more attitudinal than I do. And I'm not used to that. She said, Doc, the only reason I'm not crying on this call is for two reasons. She said, you would think because I'm pregnant, I would be more hormonal. She said, but the only reason I'm not crying is for two reasons. Number one, because I don't want to embarrass myself. And she said, number two, because I feel like somebody on this call has to be strong. And while he's not crying, his quietness is not a signal of strength. And I feel like I have to be the strong one. And she said, I'm exhausted. I said, sir, is this true? He said, it is. I said, you don't have anything else to add? He said, no, sir, I don't. I said, okay. I said, let me just explain this really quickly. And I don't think this is hard. And maybe even an analogy might not even be necessary. I said, folks, masculine and feminine energy, when done right, always produces polarity. Polarity is attraction. Polarity suggests that you have to have a positive and a negative charge in order to create a spark. You have to have a positive, masculine, negative, feminine charge to come together that creates a spark. You have to have a positive charge and a negative charge in order for that attraction to last. I said, and the reality is you can't have two negative charges or two positive charges and expect a spark. And even if you get a spark, that spark will not last. I said, and right now I am talking to two women. He looked up at me because he had his head down. I said, sir, do you finally have a comment or something you want to say? He said, no, sir, I'm just listening. I said, that's the problem. Most of this conversation, you have been treating me like you treat your wife. And the reality is there's no way you can expect her to see you as the masculine figure in this marriage and in this relationship if you never have anything to say, you have no remarks about anything, you have no comments about anything, and when you get mad, you walk around and you get quiet like a woman. She said, Doc, I understand that, and I'm not even offended by that. And she said, I know I've heard you teach about something similar to this, and I know women get offended by that, but I don't get offended by that. She said, women can very much be very catty. I said, I'm glad you said that. I have a friend who has a cat. Every now and then she'll FaceTime me. And when she does, her cat will be playing games with her. And recently I was on a call with her where she was having a hard time getting that cat to come around her. She was calling this cat's name. The cat's name is Oscar. And she was calling Oscar, and Oscar was not paying her any attention while she was on FaceTime with me. And I said to her, I said, leave Oscar alone. She said, no, Doc, if I keep calling him, then maybe he'll come. I said, no, Oscar ain't coming until you leave him alone. Leave him alone, he'll come. She left him alone. We were on the call. We were talking about some other things. Next thing I know, while she's talking, right behind her on the couch comes Oscar. He's walking behind her, not even looking towards us. He's looking straight ahead, and he walks behind her and just parks right behind her. Not on her shoulder. He's just sitting on the couch. I said, see there? I said, friend, cats are much like women. That a woman in her feminine frame might get offended by something. And a lot of times her emotions will be of such, especially if she's not healed, where she can't process all of the emotions that are going on in her mind. So she'll withdraw, at least temporarily, until she can get herself together. I said, but if you as the owner will then tap into a masculine frame where you will attempt to call her, you will attempt to make an effort to reach out to her, to let her know you're there, and then just pull back and give her time and give her space. If you hold your frame, that cat will come back. The woman said, I understand that. I said, sir, does this make sense to you? He said, yes, sir, it does. I said, but here's the problem. I said, right now, sir, you're the cat and your wife is my friend. And this is unfortunate because you can't have two negative charges and expect polarity. You can't have two negative charges and expect a spark. I said, it's easy for a woman to get pregnant. You can get pregnant just by having sex, but it does not mean there's polarity there. I said, and the reality is, sir, you're acting like a man on his cycle. He just looked at me. The wife at that point then began to tear up a little bit. I said, man, why are you getting upset now? She said, not because you said anything wrong, Doc. She said, but that's a way to explain it, to describe it, that I have not been able to come up with. I said, ma'am and sir, this ain't hard to see. I said, there's a whole lot of men walking around here on their period. You know how I know? because they're holding things inside of them: grief, resentment, anger, frustration, childhood challenges, you name it. That when they don't process those things and they get offended, they tap into those things that are already inside of them, and they allow those things inside of them to guide their behavior, to guide how they interact with people, to guide how they interact with you. I said it makes no sense for a man who desires to be masculine to be walking around like he's on his period. And I said, ma'am and sir, understand this. When you are on a cycle, the purpose of a cycle, ma'am, you know as well as I do, is to prepare a woman to be able to be pregnant with a child. I said, ma'am, you're pregnant with a child, but he ain't pregnant. He's just carrying stuff that he shouldn't be carrying. And when a man carries stuff he shouldn't be carrying, and he has not done the work to release the things that he's carrying, he becomes constipated. I said, sir, tell me about your childhood. And to my shock, on the call, he begins to tear up. I gave him a second. I said to him, I said, sir, the very fact that you're getting upset says to me that there are some things inside of you that has taught you how to not deal with offense in a good way. And when you have a correction wound, when you have not experienced correction in your life in a healthy way, from childhood all the way through adulthood, you will take offense and you will carry offense all kinds of unhealthy ways. And I said, sir, for a man who intends to be the masculine figure in his marriage, who has a wife who wants to be feminine in the marriage, this is critical, because she can't be the woman and you be the woman at the same time, or else attraction is going to go in the tubes. I said, sir, you got to deal with this stuff inside of you that has you constipated. It has you so uncomfortable that it's stopping your communication. It has you so uncomfortable that it's stopping you from being able to process things properly with your wife. It has you so uncomfortable that it's causing you to shut down like a woman and act like a cat running away, when you need to get to a place that if you're going to be in your masculine frame, you need to be logical, you need to be thoughtful, you need to be communicative, you need to be able to manage your emotions. Because the minute a man starts walking around in silence like a woman is the minute you have two women in your house. And that is the minute that polarity and attraction goes in the tubes. He told me a little bit about his childhood. It was a great conversation, to the point where he leans over, he grabs his wife's hand and apologizes to her and says to her he wants to do some individual work with me so that he can try to get his life on track. And I'm pleased to say that after that first call, we've done about 3 sessions together and he's making incredible progress. And I believe that this young couple has a shot to do it. But I said to him, I said, sir, you should never as a man walk around like you're on a cycle. Because when you are, you officially have 2 women in your house, and that's going to create chaos. I hope this made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.